The biggest mistake my husband ever made wasn't having an affair. It wasn't even moving his mistress into our vacation property. No, his biggest mistake was forgetting whose name was actually on the deed to that beautiful lakeside cabin. And what I was capable of when betrayed. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I still remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It was a Tuesday evening in late April, and I was sitting at my kitchen island, scrolling through our joint credit card statement. The granite countertop was cool beneath my elbows as I sipped my Chardonnay, reviewing the mundane purchases that made up our life together. Groceries from Whole Foods, a business lunch at Morton's Steakhouse, gas from the station near Richard's office. And then I saw it. A receipt from Tiffany & Co. for $8,750. In 23 years of marriage, Richard Taylor had never once surprised me with anything from Tiffany's. Not for birthdays, not for anniversaries, not for Christmas. Overpriced trinkets, he'd always called them whenever we'd walked past the iconic blue storefronts. I took another sip of wine and tried to calm the fluttering in my chest. Maybe he'd finally decided to surprise me. Our 25th anniversary is coming up next year. Perhaps he was planning ahead, but deep down, I knew better. I called his office. His secretary, Meredith, answered immediately. "Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews, how may I direct your call?" "Meredith, it's Elaine. Is Richard still in?" There was a brief pause. "Oh, Mrs. Taylor, I'm sorry, but Richard left early today. Said he had some personal business to attend to." Personal business. I thanked her and hung up, not bothering to leave a message. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too large. I finished my wine in one long swallow. Richard had been a founding partner at Taylor, Phillips and Matthews for 15 years. A respected corporate attorney with a reputation for ruthlessness in the courtroom and charm in the boardroom. We'd met when I was working as a paralegal at his previous firm. I'd put my own law school ambitions on hold to support his career. To raise our daughter Madeline, now at Stanford for her second year of medical school. I pulled up the Find My Phone app on my iPad. Richard and I had shared our locations years ago when Maddie was a teenager, and we'd never bothered to turn it off. The little blue dot showed his phone at Lake Arrowhead, where our vacation home sat nestled among the pines. That was strange. Richard hated going to the cabin alone. He'd always complained about the isolation, the spotty cell service, the lack of decent restaurants. It was my sanctuary, not his. I dialed his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. "This is Richard. Taylor. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." His professional voice clipped and precise. I hung up without leaving a message. 2 hours later, he walked through our front door in Los Angeles, briefcase in hand, looking exactly like the successful attorney returning from a long day at the office. "You're still up," he said, loosening his tie as he set his briefcase down. His salt and pepper hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a faint smudge of something on his collar. Lipstick? I couldn't be sure. How was Lake Arrowhead? His hand paused on his tie just for a second before he continued removing it. "What are you talking about? Your phone showed you were at the cabin today." Richard's face remained impassive, a skill honed from years of negotiations across conference tables. "Must be a glitch. I was in depositions all day, then had drinks with Matthews to discuss the Sullivan merger." "You left early today," Meredith told me. A flash of annoyance crossed his face. "You called my office? Is that really necessary, Elaine? Is spending nearly $9,000 at Tiffany's necessary, Richard?" There it was, a momentary freeze in his movements, almost imperceptible. But I'd been married to him for over 2 decades. I knew all his words. He sighed, setting his tie on the entryway table. It was supposed to be a surprise. He walked over and kissed my forehead, his cologne mingling with something else, something floral I didn't recognize. For our anniversary. But since you've already ruined it, I might as well give it to you now. Our anniversary was 2 months ago, Richard. For next year, I saw it and thought of you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small blue box. Inside was a platinum bracelet with diamonds. Beautiful, but cold somehow. Thank you, I said, slipping it onto my wrist. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. We'd been married long enough that Richard knew my size and everything. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm going to shower. As he disappeared upstairs, I sat there, fingering the bracelet. There was no price tag, but I knew what I'd seen on the statement. And Richard never, ever bought gifts in advance. The next morning, I waited until he left for work before calling Tiffany's customer service line. With some persuasion and our credit card information, the associate confirmed my suspicion. Richard had indeed spent $8,250 recently, but not on a bracelet. He'd purchased a pair of sapphire earrings. My sapphires were diamonds. I set the bracelet down on the kitchen counter and stared at it. He must have bought it elsewhere and kept the box from some previous gift. The bracelet probably cost a fraction of what he'd spent on whoever received those sapphire earrings. For the next 2 weeks, I watched and waited. Richard's behavior shifted subtly. He worked later. His phone was always face down. He took calls in the other room, voice low. The classic signs everyone warns you about played out like a cliché in our Spanish colonial home in Brentwood. When May arrived, Richard announced he needed to go to New York for a week-long conference. "Which hotel are you staying at?" I asked, casually over dinner. "The usual. Mandarin Oriental." He didn't look up from his salmon. I nodded and took a sip of water. "I was thinking of going up to the cabin while you're gone. It's been ages since I've been there, and the spring flowers should be beautiful." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I wouldn't. The property management company mentioned they're doing some maintenance on the plumbing next week. You'd be better off going in June." "Oh? That's strange. I spoke with Sierra Cabin Care yesterday about having the deck stained, and they didn't mention any plumbing work." Richard recovered quickly. "Different company. I switched providers last month. The new one is more reliable." I smiled and changed the subject, but inside, my suspicions hardened into certainty. That night, I went through his email while he slept. Nothing about cabin maintenance. Nothing about a new property management company. But there were flight confirmations, not to New York, but to San Francisco, and then a connecting flight to the small regional airport near Lake Arrowhead. 2 seats, one for Richard Taylor, one for Vanessa Mitchell. I Googled her. Young, blonde, beautiful. An associate at Taylor, Phillips and Matthews, who had joined the firm 8 months ago. Harvard Law, summa cum laude. According to the firm's website, she specialized in corporate mergers and acquisitions. According to her Instagram, which I scrolled through with a growing sense of numbness, she specialized in yoga poses on exotic beaches and cocktails at rooftop bars. There was a photo of her from 3 weeks ago, wearing what looked like sapphire earrings with the caption, "Feeling spoiled, blessed." The rage that flooded through me was almost dizzying. The next morning, I called my old friend Samantha Russell. We'd been roommates in college before I'd abandoned my legal aspirations. She'd gone on to become one of the top divorce attorneys in Los Angeles. "I need information," I told her after explaining the situation. "But I don't want to file anything yet. I need to be smart about this." "Smart is good," Sam agreed. "Let's start with what you actually know about your assets. Do you have access to all the accounts? Do you know what's in your name versus joint ownership?" I hesitated. "I think so. I mean, I know we have the house, the cabin, our retirement accounts." "Get me everything," Sam said firmly. "Bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, all of it. Knowledge is ammunition, Elaine." Over the next few days, I did exactly that. I methodically went through our financial records, creating a spreadsheet of everything we owned. That's when I made a surprising discovery. The Lake Arrowhead cabin, purchased 10 years ago as our family retreat, wasn't in both our names as I'd assumed. It wasn't even in Richard's name. It was solely mine. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I vaguely remembered Richard explaining it at the time, something about tax advantages and liability protection given my lack of connection to his firm. I signed the papers without much thought. Property law had never interested me. But now, those signatures meant something entirely different. When Richard left, for his New York conference, I waited exactly 3 hours before driving to Lake Arrowhead. The journey took longer than expected due to traffic, and the sun was beginning to set behind the mountains as I wound my way up the final stretch of road. Our cabin, my cabin, came into view, a sprawling cedar structure with large windows overlooking the lake. Richard's Porsche was in the driveway, parked beside a sleek white Audi I didn't recognize. I parked my car a short distance away, behind a cluster of pines, and approached on foot. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them. Richard and Vanessa cooking dinner together in the kitchen I had designed, laughing as they moved around each other with the easy familiarity of lovers. I stood there in the growing darkness, watching my husband pour wine for his mistress, watching her reach up to kiss him, watching them exist in a parallel life that didn't include me. And then I did something unexpected. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream or throw stones at the windows or slash tires like a woman scorned in some television drama. I simply took out my phone, recorded a short video of the two of them together in my cabin, and then drove to the nearest hotel. I had all weekend to plan my next move, and I intended to make it count. What I didn't know then was how quickly everything would unravel once Richard's law firm discovered exactly who owned that beautiful lakeside property, and what their golden boy partner had been doing there with their newest associate. The Mountain Pine Inn wasn't exactly 5-star accommodations, but it offered a clear view of the only road leading to my cabin. I checked in under my maiden name, paid cash, and requested a room facing the lake. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes named Trevor, must have sensed something in my demeanor. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked as he handed me the key. "Just a spontaneous weekend away," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Sometimes you need to step back and reassess. I spent that night in a state of strange calm, sitting by the window, watching distant lights shimmer on the lake's surface. The same lake that Richard and Vanessa were admiring from my deck. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I methodically crafted a plan, typing notes into my phone with the detachment of someone drafting a business proposal. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. First, I called my daughter at Stanford. "Maddie, honey, I need a favor." "Mom? What's wrong? You sound weird." "Always perceptive, my daughter. Nothing's wrong. I'm actually at the cabin." "Without Dad? That's unusual." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "That's actually why I'm calling. I'm working on a surprise for your father, and I need you to back me up if he calls asking where I am." "A surprise? Like what?" "Let's just say it's for our anniversary." The irony wasn't lost on me. "If he calls, just tell him I mentioned something about a spa weekend with Aunt Jennifer." "Okay," Maddie said, drawing out the word skeptically. "But you hate spas, and isn't your anniversary in March?" "It's complicated, sweetie. Just trust me, and we'll talk more soon, I promise." After hanging up, I called Sam again. "I need a recommendation for a private investigator. Someone discreet but thorough." "That bad, huh?" Sam sighed. "I know someone. Ex-FBI agent. She's not cheap, but she's the best. Her name is Diana Morris." I met Diana at a coffee shop in town 2 hours later. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair, and the watchful eyes of someone who missed nothing. I explained my situation while she listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes in a small black notebook. "So you want documentation?" she finally asked. "Everything. Photos, video, financial records, text messages if possible. I need to understand the full scope before I make my next move." Diana nodded. "What's your time frame?" 2 weeks, Richard. Believes I'm completely in the dark, and I want to keep it that way for now. Understood. She named her fee, which was indeed steep, but worth every penny if she could deliver what I needed. "One more thing, Mrs. Taylor. What's your endgame here?" I considered the question. "Justice," I finally said, "but on my terms." For the next 2 weeks, I maintained an Oscar-worthy performance. When Richard returned from his conference, I greeted him with the same routine domesticity we'd settled into over the years. I asked about New York. He spun elaborate stories about panels and networking events, even presenting me with a silk scarf he claimed to have purchased at Bloomingdale's. The price tag had been removed, but I recognized it from a boutique in Lake Arrowhead Village. I wore it to dinner the next night and watched him flinch slightly when I mentioned how similar it was to something I'd seen locally. Meanwhile, Diana was sending daily updates. Richard and Vanessa hadn't returned to the cabin yet, but she'd uncovered plenty. Credit card statements showing dinners at intimate restaurants when Richard had claimed to be working late. Hotel charges in cities where the firm had no clients. A paper trail of lies that grew more damning by the day. Most crucially, she discovered that Vanessa wasn't just any associate. She had been specifically requested by Richard for the Sullivan merger, a massive corporate acquisition that represented the firm's biggest case of the year. According to Diana's sources within the firm, Vanessa had been given responsibilities well beyond her experience level, at Richard's insistence. "He's setting her up for advancement," Diana explained during one of our secure calls. "Positioning her for a partnership track much earlier than normal. At the expense of other associates who are more qualified," I mused. "Exactly. And there's more. The Sullivan merger involves sensitive financial data. My contact says there have been concerns about some of the numbers, specifically from the files Richard and Vanessa have been handling." That gave me pause. "You think they're manipulating data?" "I'm saying it's worth looking into. I've got someone checking the financial disclosures against the original documents." 3 days later, Diana confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. There were discrepancies in the merger documents, subtle alterations that would significantly benefit certain shareholders, including a shell company that had recently been established in the Cayman Islands. "Can you trace the shell company?" I asked. "Already did. It's registered to VM Holdings LLC, Vanessa Mitchell." Richard was not only sleeping with an associate, he was potentially engaging in securities fraud to benefit her. Or perhaps they were in it together. I thanked Diana for her thoroughness and asked her to compile everything into a comprehensive file. And I mean everything. The affair, the financial irregularities, his misuse of firm resources to advance, her career. "What about the cabin? Want me to document their next visit?" "No," I said after a moment's consideration. "I'll handle that personally." The following Friday, Richard announced he had to go to Chicago for a deposition. His tell was visible, the slight tightening around his eyes as he lied. I checked his actual booking, 2 tickets to Lake Arrowhead again. "That's too bad," I said, kissing his cheek. "I'm having dinner with Sam tomorrow. You remember Samantha Russell? My college roommate." Richard frowned slightly. "The divorce attorney? Why are you meeting with her?" I laughed, the sound deliberately light. "She's still my friend, Richard. We're not all defined by our professions. Besides, her daughter is considering medical school. I thought Maddie could give her some insight." He seemed to accept this explanation, and the tension in his shoulders eased. After he left the next morning, I drove to Sam's office with Diana's file in hand. We spent hours going through everything, building a strategy that would protect me while maximizing the impact of the revelations. "This isn't just an affair case anymore," Sam said as she reviewed the financial documents. "This is potential criminal activity. Securities fraud carries serious penalties." "I know," I replied. "That's why I need to be careful about how we proceed. Richard has powerful friends." "So do you," Sam reminded me. "And you have something else, the moral high ground and solid evidence." We constructed a careful timeline. First, I would secure my financial assets, transferring what I legally could to accounts in my name only. Next, we would approach the managing partners at Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews, but not directly. "The annual partners retreat is next weekend at the Beverly Wilshire," Sam noted, checking her calendar. "Every major law firm in the city sends representatives. I can make sure the right people see the right information." "No," I said firmly. "I have a better idea." The scene was set. While Richard and Vanessa enjoyed their weekend at my cabin, I made preparations of my own. I contacted the property management company, the real one, not the fictional one Richard had invented, and arranged for certain upgrades to be installed immediately. Security cameras, new locks, and most importantly, a detailed property inspection to be conducted first thing Monday morning. I then reached out to Taylor, Phillips and Matthews' most senior partner, William Matthews himself, an old-school attorney, with a reputation for impeccable ethics. I'd met him several times at firm functions over the years. "Mrs. Taylor," he greeted me warmly when I called. "What a pleasure. Richard mentioned you were visiting family this weekend." "Did he? How interesting," I replied. "Actually, Mr. Matthews, I need to speak with you regarding a delicate matter. It concerns the firm directly." There was a brief pause. "I see. Would Monday be convenient?" "Actually, I was hoping we could meet tomorrow, at my property in Lake Arrowhead. There's something you need to see firsthand." After a moment's hesitation, he agreed. Sunday morning dawned clear and beautiful over the lake. I arrived at the cabin at precisely 9:30 a.m., half an hour before my scheduled meeting with Matthews. Through the windows, I could see Richard and Vanessa moving about the kitchen, preparing what looked like a late breakfast. I used my key to enter silently through the side door, the one that opened directly into the mudroom. I could hear their voices now, relaxed, intimate, punctuated by laughter. "We should come here every weekend," Vanessa was saying. "It's so much better than those stuffy hotels." "That's the plan, eventually," Richard replied, "once things are settled." The implication hung in the air between them. Once things were settled with me, I stepped into the main room where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the spectacular lake view. "It is beautiful here, isn't it?" Richard froze, a coffee mug halfway to his lips. Vanessa dropped a spatula, which clattered against the hardwood floor. "Elaine." Richard recovered first, setting down his mug with deliberate slowness. "This isn't... What does it look like?" I finished for him, my voice remarkably steady. "I think it's exactly what it looks like, Richard. You brought your mistress to my cabin." "Your cabin?" Vanessa echoed, confusion clouding her features as she looked between us. "Oh, he didn't tell you?" I smiled thinly. "This property is solely in my name, has been from the day we bought it. Tax advantages, liability protection. Isn't that what you told me, Richard?" The color drained from his face. "We need to discuss this privately," he said, his lawyer voice taking over. "Vanessa, perhaps you should stay right where you are." "Ms. Mitchell," I interrupted. "This concerns you too, especially the part about the Sullivan merger and the fascinating offshore account registered to VM Holdings." Now it was Vanessa's turn to pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? Well, William Matthews might find it interesting. He should be arriving any minute now." As if on cue, the crunch of tires on gravel announced a vehicle pulling into the driveway. "You invited Bill here?" Richard's voice was incredulous, tinged with the first notes of genuine fear I'd heard from him. I did, along with the property inspector, who's coming to document the state of my cabin before I file the formal complaint against both of you for trespassing and unauthorized use of my property. Richard's expression hardened. You're bluffing. This is a marital asset. Check the deed, I countered. It's all very legal, very proper. Your firm handled the paperwork, after all. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the suddenly silent room. I moved to answer it, but paused next to Richard. You know what your mistake was? I asked quietly. Not the affair. Not even moving her in here. It was forgetting that I was a paralegal before I was your wife. I understand the documentation. I understand the evidence. I opened the door to reveal William Matthews, his imposing figure framed in the doorway, confusion evident on his face. As he took in the scene before him, Mrs. Taylor, he began, then stopped when he spotted Richard and Vanessa. His expression shifted from confusion to comprehension to professional granite in the span of seconds. William, Richard started, stepping forward. This isn't a professional matter. I think you'll find it is, I interjected smoothly, handing Matthews a sealed envelope. This contains documentation of several concerning issues that directly impact Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews. I've included evidence of an inappropriate relationship between a partner and an associate, misuse of firm resources, preferential treatment affecting other associates' advancement, and most critically, potential securities fraud related to the, Sullivan merger. Matthews accepted the envelope with a grim expression. These are serious allegations, Mrs. Taylor. They are, and they're fully documented. I've provided copies of all evidence to the SEC as well, though I instructed them to wait for your internal review before proceeding. Richard lunged forward. You had no right. I had every right, I cut him off. As a citizen concerned about financial crimes. As a property owner whose space has been used for conducting said crimes. And as a woman who refuses to be discarded after 23 years of marriage. Matthews opened the envelope and scanned the first page of documents, his expression growing more severe with each line. Richard, Ms. Mitchell, I suggest you both gather your belongings immediately. We'll reconvene at the office in 2 hours. Bill, come on! Richard attempted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. We've known each other for decades. Surely we can— 2 hours, Richard, Matthews repeated firmly, and I suggest you bring separate counsel. As Vanessa hurriedly gathered her things, tears streaming down her face, Richard turned to me, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. You've destroyed everything, he hissed. My career, my reputation. No, Richard, I replied calmly. You did that yourself. I'm simply making sure you face the consequences. Matthews cleared his throat. Mrs. Taylor, a word outside if you don't mind. We stepped onto the deck, leaving Richard and Vanessa to their frantic packing. The lake stretched before us, serene and indifferent to the human drama unfolding on its shores. I must say, Matthews began, his voice low. This is one of the most troubling situations I've encountered in 40 years of practice. I understand, and I apologize, for bringing firm business to you on a Sunday, but given the nature of the Sullivan merger and its timeline, I felt it couldn't wait. He nodded thoughtfully. Your documentation appears thorough. May I ask how you obtained some of this financial information? All legally, I assured him. Public records, documents Richard left accessible on our home network, and material obtained through legitimate financial research. Nothing that would compromise your case against them, should you choose to pursue one. And the property? Richard always referred to this as our cabin. I smiled faintly. Check the county records. It's solely in my name, his suggestion ironically. I believe his exact words were, better to keep some assets separate from the firm's potential liability. Matthews actually chuckled at that, a short, dry sound. The universe has a certain poetry sometimes, doesn't it? Behind us, the glass door slid open, and Richard emerged, a weekend bag clutched in his white-knuckled grip. Vanessa trailed behind him, her earlier confidence entirely evaporated. "We'll discuss this at the office," Richard said stiffly to Matthews, pointedly ignoring me. "One moment, Richard," I said, holding out my hand. "The keys, please." His jaw tightened, but he reached into his pocket and removed the cabin keys, slapping them into my palm with unnecessary force. "And the security code has been changed," I added. "So don't bother trying to return when I'm not here." Without another word, he stalked to his Porsche, Vanessa following miserably to the Audi. The two cars backed out of the driveway in tandem, disappearing down the winding road toward town. Matthews watched them go, then turned back to me with an evaluating gaze. "What happens now, Mrs. Taylor?" I took a deep breath of pine-scented air and looked out over the tranquil water. "Now, Mr. Matthews, I reclaim what's mine. Starting with this cabin." I gestured to the beautiful cedar structure behind us. "And ending with my life." What I didn't say was that this was just the beginning. Richard had underestimated me for the last time, and the full extent of my response was still unfolding. His law firm's discovery of the property ownership was merely the first domino to fall in a carefully arranged sequence that would reshape both our futures irrevocably. After Matthews departed with promises of swift action, I stood alone on the deck of my cabin, watching the sunlight dance across the lake's surface. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe fully. The mountain air filled my lungs, crisp and cleansing. I'd taken back control, but this was far from over. I called Sam immediately. "It's done. Matthews has the evidence." "How did Richard react?" she asked. "About as well as you'd expect. Anger, then panic, then threats." "Classic stages of a caught cheater," Sam said dryly. "What's your next move?" "I'm staying at the cabin tonight. I need to look through everything, make sure nothing's been tampered with." I paused. "And I need to call Maddie." That was the conversation I dreaded most. Our daughter adored her father and had followed in his footsteps by choosing a professional career path. This would shatter her image of him. "Do you want me to drive up there?" Sam offered. "You shouldn't be alone right now." "I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. I've been alone in this marriage for longer than I realized. At least, now it's official." After we hung up, I walked through each room of the cabin, taking inventory. In the master bedroom, remnants of their weekend lingered, a strand of long blonde hair on the pillow that had once been mine, an unfamiliar perfume hanging in the air. I stripped the bed with methodical precision, stuffing the sheets into a garbage bag rather than the laundry. Some things couldn't be washed clean. In the bathroom, I found Vanessa's toiletries, expensive French brands arranged neatly beside Richard's familiar products. I swept them into the trash as well, then scrubbed the counters until my hands were raw and the scent of bleach overpowered everything else. When the physical traces were gone, I settled onto the couch with my laptop and a glass of Cabernet. The security system I'd installed captured footage from both inside and outside the property. I hadn't told Matthews about these cameras yet. That evidence was my insurance policy. I scrolled through the recorded footage from the past month. Richard and Vanessa had visited the cabin 3 times, each trip documented in high definition. I watched them cook together, swim in the lake, work side by side at the dining table surrounded by papers marked with the Sullivan Company logo. Most damning was the footage from the previous night. They sat at that same table, Richard pointing to specific sections of documents while Vanessa made notations. Their conversation was captured with crystal clarity by the hidden microphones. If anyone checks these numbers against the original, "Filings were done," Vanessa said, her pen hovering over a spreadsheet. Richard shook his head. "Nobody's going to check. The partners trust me implicitly, and the clients just want the deal to close. By the time anyone might notice discrepancies, the funds will have been transferred offshore. And my commission? 20%. as agreed. Nearly 8 million after the merger finalizes. Enough to disappear completely if we ever needed to. I paused the footage, my hand trembling slightly as I refilled my wine glass. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't even simple securities. Fraud. This was a calculated scheme involving millions of dollars, with contingency plans for escaping justice. I copied the relevant clips onto a secure flash drive, then called Diana. "I need you to get this to your contact at the SEC immediately," I told her. "And make a copy for the FBI. This goes beyond what I initially suspected." "Will do." "What about Matthews?" I considered the question. "Give him 48 hours to handle it internally. If Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews doesn't take appropriate action by then, release everything." "You're playing hardball," Diana observed. "Most clients in your position would focus solely on the divorce leverage." "This isn't about divorce anymore," I replied. "This is about justice." After hanging up, I finally made the call I'd been dreading. Maddie answered on the third ring, her voice bright with the optimism of youth. "Mom, how's the spa weekend going?" I took a deep breath. "Honey, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear." There was a pause. Then her voice changed, instantly alert. "What's wrong? Is Dad okay?" "Your father is physically fine," I assured her. "But there are some serious issues happening with his work and our marriage." Over the next half hour, I explained the situation in measured terms, omitting the most sordid details, but providing enough truth that she wouldn't be blindsided by whatever might hit the news in the coming days. Her silence on the other end grew heavier as I continued. "So he's been cheating on you," she finally said, her voice small and hurt. "With someone from his firm, and they might have broken the law together." "Yes." "How long have you known?" "About the affair?" "A few weeks. About the potential financial impropriety." "Just days." Another long silence. "I'm coming home." "Maddie, no. You have exams." "I don't care about exams right now, Mom. I'm coming home. I'll book a flight for tomorrow." After we hung up, I forwarded the cabin security footage to my secure cloud account, then poured another glass of wine and stepped back onto the deck. The sun was setting now, painting the lake with streaks of orange and gold. Beauty amid destruction. A metaphor for what my life had become. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Vanessa. "We need to talk. Alone. It's not what you think." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. "I have video of you discussing the offshore accounts and the Sullivan merger fraud. It's exactly what I think." 3 dots appeared as she typed, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, "You don't understand. Richard set me up. I can prove it. Meet me at the Mountain Pine Inn in an hour." I hesitated. It could be a trap. But my instincts told me something else was at play, and those instincts had served me well so far. "Room 112, I replied. "Come alone." I arrived early, securing a position where I could observe the parking lot. When Vanessa pulled up in her white Audi, she was indeed alone. She looked different from the confident young woman I'd seen in photos and security footage. Disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, movements jittery as she scanned the lot before hurrying to room 112. I waited 10 minutes, then knocked on the door. She opened it immediately, stepping back to let me enter. The room was small but clean, with 2 queen beds and a view of the parking lot. Vanessa had laid several file folders on one of the beds. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice hoarse. "I know you have every reason to hate me." "I don't." "Hate you?" I replied truthfully. "I don't know you." "Richard told me you were separated," she blurted. "When we first, he said you'd been living separate lives for years. That divorce was imminent but complicated because of firm politics." A convenient lie. I sat on the edge of the other bed, keeping distance between us. "But not why we're here now." She nodded, pushing her blonde hair behind her ears in a nervous gesture. The Sullivan merger. You need to understand my role in this. Enlighten me. Vanessa handed me one of the folders. Inside were emails, dating, back nearly a year before she joined the firm. All from Richard, to an email address I didn't recognize. That was my personal account, she explained. Richard approached me while I was still at Peterson and Blake. He said he'd been impressed with my work on a case where our firms opposed each other. He offered me a position at Taylor, Phillips & Matthews with the understanding that I'd work primarily with him. I scanned the emails. They started professionally, then gradually became more personal. More suggestive. When did the affair begin? 3 months after I joined the firm, she admitted, avoiding my gaze. By then, I was already committed to the Sullivan case. Richard had been mentoring me, giving me opportunities that other junior associates never received. I was flattered, grateful. And the offshore accounts? She handed me another folder. These are the original merger documents. Richard altered them after I'd done the initial work. When I discovered the changes, he claimed it was standard practice, a way to maximize client benefit while minimizing tax exposure. But you knew it was a fraud. Vanessa's shoulders slumped. Not immediately. He introduced each change gradually, explaining them as sophisticated but legitimate tax strategies. By the time I realized we'd crossed legal lines, I was already implicated. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. And by then, he had leverage. The affair. She nodded miserably. Photos, texts, videos taken without my knowledge. He made it clear that if the scheme was ever discovered, evidence would surface showing I was the architect. His position in the firm would insulate him. I would be the ambitious young associate who manipulated her way into a partnership track, through fraud and seduction. It was a disturbingly plausible scenario. Richard had always been meticulous about creating escape routes and scapegoats. It was what made him such an effective corporate attorney. He anticipated worst-case scenarios and prepared for them accordingly. Why come forward now? Why not run? Because running would confirm my guilt, she said simply. And because of what he's done to me, to you, to the firm and its clients, it's wrong. Some things matter more than career ambition. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Her distress seemed genuine, but I'd been fooled before. These documents, I said, tapping the folders. Copies or originals? Copies. Originals are in a secure location. Smart. I stood up. I'll need all of this, plus a sworn statement detailing everything you've told me, including your relationship with Richard and each step of the Sullivan fraud. Her eyes widened. If I do that, my career is over. Your career is already compromised. The question now is whether you end up in prison alongside Richard. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. I'll do it. Tonight. One more thing, I added. The offshore account, VM Holdings, that's registered in your name. Not exactly, she replied, handing me one final document, the incorporation papers, for VM Holdings LLC. The primary beneficiary was listed as Victoria Marshall. Richard created an entity similar to my initials but not actually mine. Another layer of his setup. I don't have access to those accounts. I examined the document carefully. It was a sophisticated frame, similar enough to implicate Vanessa, but legally distinct, exactly Richard's style. Send everything to this email address, I instructed, writing down a secure account I'd established for communications with Diana, including your statement. I'll have my attorney contact you tomorrow regarding next steps. As I turned to leave, Vanessa called after me. Mrs. Taylor, Elaine, I truly am sorry, not just for the affair, but for all of it. I paused at the door. Save your apology for the SEC. They'll determine its value. The drive back to my cabin was a blur of thoughts and recalculations. If Vanessa was telling the truth, and my instinct said she was, then Richard's scheme was even more calculated than I'd initially suspected. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd set up a systematic plan to betray everyone in his orbit, creating a young scapegoat while he walked away with millions. When I pulled into my driveway, there was another car parked there, a black Mercedes I recognized as Matthew's. He stood on my deck, gazing out at the moonlit lake. "Breaking and entering, Mr. Matthews," I called as I approached. He turned, his expression grave in the dim light. The door was unlocked. "I took a chance that you might return. This evening." "What couldn't wait until tomorrow?" He gestured to one of the Adirondack chairs. "Please sit. This concerns both our interests." I complied, curious despite my exhaustion. Matthews remained standing, hands clasped behind his back like he was addressing a jury. "The firm conducted an emergency partners meeting this afternoon," he began. "After reviewing your evidence, we've initiated internal proceedings against Richard." "And Vanessa Mitchell?" "She's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." He paused. "Richard claims she masterminded the entire scheme, using their relationship to manipulate him and gain access to sensitive documents. So Richard was already implementing his contingency plan." "And you believe him?" Matthew's expression tightened. "I've known Richard for 20 years. We built this firm together. But no, Mrs. Taylor, I do not believe him." "Good, because I just met with Ms. Mitchell. She tells a very different story, with documentation to support it." I briefly outlined what Vanessa had shared, including the VM Holdings deception. Matthews listened without interruption, his frown deepening. "May I see this documentation?" "Tomorrow, after my attorney reviews everything." He nodded, accepting this condition. "There's something else you should know. The Sullivan merger is scheduled to close on Friday. If Richard's manipulations are part of the final paperwork, then the firm becomes complicit in securities fraud," I finished. "Along with every partner, including me," Matthews confirmed grimly. "Our professional insurance wouldn't cover this level of malfeasance. Every partner could face personal financial liability, not to mention potential criminal charges." Now, I understood why he'd driven up to the cabin himself, late on a Sunday evening. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. The entire firm was at risk. "What do you propose?" Matthew sat in the chair opposite me, suddenly looking at every one of his 60-plus years. "A coordinated response. The firm needs to demonstrate it took immediate action upon discovering the fraud. That means terminating Richard effective immediately and cooperating fully with any SEC investigation. And in return? In return, we would hope that you might direct any evidence you've gathered to the appropriate authorities through us, allowing the firm to maintain some control over the narrative and mitigate damage to innocent parties." I considered his proposal. It served my purposes. Richard would still face consequences, while potentially saving the careers of partners and associates who had no involvement in the scheme. "I have conditions," I said. "First, Vanessa Mitchell receives immunity from the firm if she cooperates fully. She was manipulated, both professionally and personally." Matthews hesitated, then nodded. "Provided her testimony aligns with the evidence, yes." "Second, the firm provides me with detailed accounting of all Richard's assets, including any hidden accounts you may discover during your investigation." "That's highly unusual." "So is securities fraud conducted from a partner's wife's vacation." "Property," I countered. "Richard has been moving assets for months. I need to know what's mine." After another moment's consideration, he agreed. "What else?" "The firm makes public that Richard acted without knowledge or approval from other partners. Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews accepts no responsibility for his actions." "You're protecting the firm," Matthews observed, surprise evident in his voice. "I'm protecting innocent people," I corrected. "Associates who've done nothing wrong. Staff who depend on their jobs. Clients who trusted you." I paused. "And I'm protecting my daughter from unnecessary scandal." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Madeline, Of course. Richard has taken enough from this family. I won't let his actions destroy our daughter's faith in everything and everyone. Matthews stood, extending his hand. We have an agreement, Mrs. Taylor. I'll have papers drawn up by morning. As we shook hands, I added one final condition. The cabin stays out of all official records. This property is not mentioned in any statement to anyone. He raised an eyebrow but nodded. May I ask why? I looked out at the tranquil water, silver under the moonlight, because despite everything that's happened here, this place still represents peace to me. And I've earned some peace, don't you think? After Matthews left, I sat alone on the deck for a long time, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. My phone buzzed periodically, Richard leaving increasingly desperate voice messages that I didn't bother to listen to. The time for his explanations had passed. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Maddie. My daughter deserved more than a hurried phone call. She deserved the full truth, carefully explained, along with my assurance that regardless of what happened with her father, she was loved unconditionally. As I typed, I felt a strange lightness spreading through me. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was making choices solely for myself. Not as Richard's wife, not even primarily as Maddie's mother, but as Elaine, a woman reclaiming her life one decision at a time. The realization brought with it not just lightness, but clarity. I knew exactly what needed to happen next. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that only mountain air can bring. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and sat on the deck watching the first golden rays break over the eastern ridge. My phone had finally stopped buzzing around 3 a.m. Richard presumably had run out of threats, pleas, and justifications. I had 17 missed calls from him, 5 from unknown numbers, and 1 text message from Matthews confirming our agreement had been formalized into a document awaiting my signature. My email inbox contained Vanessa's sworn statement, 15 pages detailing every aspect of Richard's scheme, with supporting documents attached. I forwarded everything to Sam, then called Diana. I've been expecting your call, she answered immediately. News travels fast in legal circles. Word is Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews called an all-hands emergency meeting for 9 a.m. Matthews is moving quickly, I observed. Good. My SEC contact wants to meet with you today. The evidence you've provided is substantial, but they need a formal statement. I agreed to meet the SEC investigator at Sam's office that afternoon. What about the FBI? Securities fraud crosses into their jurisdiction. They're coordinating with the SEC on this one. Joint task force. The dollar amounts involved triggered automatic protocols. After hanging up, I packed my overnight bag and took one last look around the cabin. Despite everything that had happened here, I felt no desire to sell it. This place represented something essential to me: independence, tranquility, a connection to nature that had always centered me. Richard's betrayal couldn't taint that. The drive back to Los Angeles gave me time to process everything. By the time I reached our Brentwood home, my resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. I pulled into the driveway, noting with satisfaction that Richard's Porsche was absent. He was either at the firm's emergency meeting or had gone into hiding. Inside, the house felt different. Larger, emptier, yet somehow less oppressive. I went straight to our shared home office and opened Richard's filing cabinet with the key I'd had duplicated years ago. Most of the sensitive documents would be at his firm office, but Richard had always kept backup records of his most important affairs at home. Behind a false panel in the bottom drawer, I found what I was looking for: a slim leather portfolio containing account numbers, passwords, and contact information for financial institutions in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. Classic Richard, always prepared, always one step ahead. Except this time. I photographed every page with my phone, then replaced the portfolio exactly as I'd found it. Let him believe his secrets were still safe for now. Next, I went upstairs to our bedroom and packed a suitcase with essentials. Not everything. I didn't want Richard to realize I'd moved out. Just enough for a week or two. Then I drove to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel and checked into a suite under my maiden name, using a credit card Richard didn't know existed. From the hotel, I called Maddie. "I've moved out of the house temporarily," I explained. "When you arrive?" "Tomorrow. Come directly to the Beverly Wilshire." "Dad's been calling me nonstop," she said, her voice heavy with confusion and hurt. "He says there's been a misunderstanding, that you've jumped to conclusions because of work stress." "What do you believe?" I asked gently. A long pause. "I believe something serious happened. Dad doesn't panic, and he sounds panicked." "Trust that instinct, honey. I'll explain everything when you're here." After arranging for Maddie's car service, from the airport, I headed to Sam's office for the SEC meeting. The federal investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Teresa Vasquez, spent 3 hours taking my statement, reviewing the evidence, and asking precise questions about Richard's activities. "Based on what you've provided, we have grounds for immediate action," Vasquez concluded. "The Sullivan merger will be halted pending investigation, and will be freezing several accounts associated with VM Holdings." "What about Richard personally?" I asked. "We'll be seeking a warrant for financial records and devices. Securities fraud at this level carries potential penalties of up to 20 years federal imprisonment, plus fines." She closed her notepad. "Mrs. Taylor, I have to ask, did you have any knowledge of these activities before discovering the affair?" "None," I replied firmly. "Richard compartmentalized his life. Work stayed at work, until it didn't." Vasquez nodded, apparently satisfied. "One more question. The offshore accounts. You mentioned finding documentation in your home office. We'll need those originals." "Of course. I photographed them but left them in place. I assumed you'd want to catch him with the evidence in his possession. A ghost." A smile touched her lips. "Smart thinking. We'll coordinate with local authorities on timing." As Vasquez gathered her materials, Sam pulled me aside. "Matthews called while you were giving your statement. Richard didn't show up for the emergency meeting." "What?" "They've been trying to reach him since last night. No response. His assistant said his calendar was cleared for the entire week, supposedly for a client retreat in Aspen, but the client in question denies any such meeting." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "He's running." Sam nodded grimly. "It looks that way." "Check the airports," I instructed Vasquez. "Private flights especially. Richard has contacts with charter companies." "Already on it," she assured me. "We've flagged his passport and issued alerts to transportation hubs." After the SEC team departed, Sam poured us each a generous glass of bourbon. "You know," she said, raising her glass, "in 15 years of handling high-conflict divorces, I've never seen anyone navigate a crisis with such precision. Most people in your position would be falling apart right now." I considered this as I sipped the amber liquid. I think I did my falling apart over months without realizing it. All those nights lying awake, wondering why Richard was growing distant, blaming myself for not being exciting enough or successful enough or young enough. That was falling apart. I gestured to the files spread across Sam's desk. "This is the reconstruction." "Well, I'd say you're rebuilding magnificently." She blinked her glass against mine. "What's your next move?" "Protect Maddie. Secure my financial future. Make sure Richard faces consequences for his actions, professional and legal." "And personal? What about divorce proceedings?" I laughed softly. At this point, divorce seems almost redundant. His career is imploding, his freedom is in jeopardy, and his reputation is irreparably damaged. The dissolution of our marriage is practically a footnote. "Never underestimate the vindictiveness of a cornered man," Sam warned, "especially one with Richard's resources and connections." "True," I acknowledged. "File the paperwork. Full financial. Discovery." And let's request an emergency freezing order on all marital assets. Sam made notes, then glanced up with a questioning look. Grounds? Adultery, fraud, and abandonment, I replied without hesitation. Let's not be subtle. When I returned to the Beverly Wilshire, there was a message waiting for me at the front desk. Not from Richard, as I'd half expected, but from Vanessa Mitchell. She requested a meeting at her apartment that evening. Urgent new information. I debated briefly, then texted my acceptance with a condition. Bring all devices Richard ever used in your presence. Her reply came immediately. Will do. 8 p.m. Vanessa's apartment was in a modern high-rise in downtown LA, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights. She greeted me wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking younger and more vulnerable than the polished professional I'd seen in photographs. Thank you for coming, she said, leading me into a minimally furnished living room. On the coffee table lay 3 laptops, 2 tablets, and several external hard drives. These are everything he ever used at my place. I've never turned them on. I don't know his passwords, but I thought they might help. The SEC will want these, I said, impressed despite myself at her thoroughness. What's the urgent information? Vanessa took a deep breath. Richard called me about an hour ago. He's in Mexico. Mexico? I echoed, surprised. Not the Caymans or Switzerland? He said it's temporary, just until he can access accounts that weren't frozen. She hesitated. He wants me to join him. Says he has enough money hidden away that neither of us would ever have to work again. And what did you tell him? I said I needed time to think, to tie up loose ends here. Her expression hardened. I needed him to believe I might come so he'd stay in contact. I studied her, reassessing my initial judgment. You're smarter than he gave you credit for. He made that mistake with both of us, she replied simply. Mrs. Taylor, Elaine, please. Elaine. There's more. When Richard called, he mentioned a backup plan involving someone named Victor Mercer. He said Mercer had the package and would execute on schedule regardless. The name meant nothing to me, but the phrasing sent alarm bells ringing. Did he elaborate? She shook her head. He was being deliberately vague, I think, but he sounded satisfied. Like whatever this backup plan is, it gives him leverage. I pulled out my phone and texted Diana. Need urgent background on Victor Mercer. Connection to Richard Taylor. Do you mind if I record our conversation? I asked Vanessa, in case Richard calls again. Not at all. I want everything on record. She gestured to the devices on the table. That's why I saved these. I need it to be clear that I'm cooperating fully. We set up my phone to record, and Vanessa called Richard on speaker. He answered on the first ring. Have you made a decision? His voice was tense, impatient. I'm still organizing things here, Vanessa replied, impressively steady. It's not easy to disappear overnight, Richard. We don't have much time. The SEC has already frozen most of the Sullivan-related accounts. What about the others? The personal ones you mentioned? A pause. Still accessible. Enough to set us up comfortably in a non-extradition country. I've been looking at properties in Belize. Belize sounds nice, Vanessa said, catching my eye. When do you need my answer? Tomorrow. Latest. After that, things get complicated. Mercer moves forward with or without my direct input. You never fully explained who Mercer is. Richard's laugh held no humor. Better you don't know the details. Plausible deniability. Just understand he's my insurance policy. Against what? Against everyone who's trying to destroy me. Elaine, Matthews, the firm. His voice hardened. They think they've won, but they haven't seen my endgame yet. After a few more minutes of vague reassurances, Vanessa ended the call, her hands visibly shaking. He's planning something beyond just running with the money. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Victor Mercer, former private security contractor, specialized in corporate espionage and electronic warfare. Worked with Taylor on the Westlake Industries case 3 years ago. Known for scorched earth. Tactics. Currently off-grid. Dangerous. I showed Vanessa the message. Whatever Richard's planning, it's not good. We need to get this information to the authorities immediately. Should I keep playing along? Try to get more details? I considered the risk versus potential benefit. One more call tomorrow. Supervised, recorded, and with authorities notified in advance. After that, you cut contact completely. She nodded, relief evident in her expression. I never thought I'd end up here. When I joined the firm, I had such different plans for my career. Life rarely follows the path we expect, I replied, gathering my purse. The question is what we do when we find ourselves on an unfamiliar road. What will you do? She asked, suddenly. After all this is resolved, if it ever is. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on dismantling Richard's schemes that I'd given little thought to what came after. I'm not sure yet. Return to my own career, perhaps. I was halfway through law school when I met Richard. You'd make a formidable attorney, Vanessa observed. We'll see. First, let's make sure Richard's endgame doesn't cause any more damage. Back. At the hotel, I called Investigator Vasquez with the new information about Richard's location and the mysterious Victor Mercer. She took the details with professional calm, but I could hear the tension in her voice. We'll coordinate with Mexican authorities immediately. As for Mercer, we'll need to identify what this package might be. Something destructive, based on Richard's tone and Mercer's background, possibly targeting the firm or individuals there. We'll increase security protocols and alert Matthews, she assured me. And Mrs. Taylor, you might consider additional personal security until this is resolved. After hanging up, I did precisely that, arranging for a private security detail to meet Maddie at the airport tomorrow and escort her to the hotel. Whatever Richard was planning, I wouldn't let it touch our daughter. I was about to turn in for the night when my phone rang once more. A blocked number, I answered cautiously. Elaine. Richard's voice, unexpectedly calm. I think it's time we talked directly, don't you? I have nothing to say to you, Richard. Oh, I think you do, he replied smoothly, especially when it concerns the future of our daughter. My blood ran cold. Don't you dare bring Maddie into this. I'm not the one who involved her. You did that when you decided to destroy everything I've built. His tone hardened. Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies in place? That I would just accept defeat and disappear? What do you want, Richard? A simple exchange. You call off the SEC and FBI investigation, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. You transfer the cabin to my name, and in return I ensure that certain compromising information about Madeline never sees the light of day. What information? I demanded, though part of me didn't want to know. Let's just say our daughter's medical school application wasn't entirely forthcoming about an incident during her undergraduate years. Something involving prescription stimulants during finals week. The kind of scandal that could end a promising medical career before it begins. The room seemed to tilt around me. Maddie had never mentioned any such incident, but that didn't mean it hadn't happened. College students make mistakes. But Richard exploited that to blackmail me. It represented a new low, even for him. You would ruin your own daughter's future to save yourself? My voice was barely a whisper. I'm offering to protect her future, he corrected. The choice is yours. Call off the dogs, or Mercer releases a comprehensive file to Stanford's ethics. Board tomorrow morning. I need time to think. You have until 9 a.m. Pacific time. I'll be in touch for your answer. The line went dead, leaving me in stunned silence. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, mind racing through options, implications, potential bluffs. Richard had always been ruthless in business, but I never imagined he would weaponize our child's future against me. I called Sam, explaining the situation in clipped sentences. It could be a complete fabrication, she pointed out. A desperate ploy to leverage your maternal instincts. Or it could be real, I countered. Either way, I need to know before Maddie lands tomorrow. I'll make some calls. I have contacts at Stanford who might be able to discreetly verify if there's any record of an incident. And if there is, if Richard really does have something, that could damage her career? Sam's voice softened. Then we deal with that reality when we confirm it. But Elaine, consider this. If you back down now, you're teaching Maddie that it's acceptable to be held hostage by threats and manipulation. Is that the lesson you want her to learn from all this? The question hung in the air between us, unanswerable, in the moment. After we hung up, I stood at the window of my hotel suite, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. Thousands of lights representing thousands of lives, each with their own complicated truths and difficult choices. Tomorrow, Maddie would arrive. Tomorrow, Richard expected my surrender. Tomorrow, somewhere in the city, a man named Victor Mercer was preparing to execute a plan that would impact all our lives. But tonight, in this moment of suspended action, I made a decision that would determine everything that followed. I would not be moved by fear. Not Richard's threats, not uncertainty about the future, not even concern for my daughter's career, because whatever challenge awaited us tomorrow, I knew with absolute certainty that the greatest gift I could give Maddie wasn't protection from consequences. It was demonstrating the power of standing firm in your truth, no matter how difficult the path forward might be. Sleep eluded me that night. I paced the hotel suite, my mind cycling through possibilities, strategies, and worst-case scenarios. By dawn, I'd made dozens of notes, placed several calls to Sam, Diana, and investigator Vasquez, and formulated a plan that felt both risky and necessary. At 6 a.m., I received a text from Sam. No record of any disciplinary action involving Maddie at Stanford. Either it was handled off books or Richard is bluffing. It was the first piece of good news in what promised to be a challenging day. I showered, dressed in a charcoal suit that had always given me confidence, and prepared to meet my daughter's flight. The security team Diana had arranged met me in the hotel lobby, two former military personnel who moved with quiet efficiency. We drove to LAX in silence, the morning traffic surprisingly light. Maddie's flight landed 20 minutes early. When she emerged from the secure area, my heart constricted. She looked exhausted, her normally vibrant face drawn with worry, dark circles beneath her eyes. She'd pulled her long brown hair, like mine before I started coloring the gray, into a messy ponytail, and wore Stanford Medical School sweats that seemed to swallow her slender frame. When she spotted me, she dropped her carry-on and rushed forward. We held each other tightly, neither speaking for a long moment. "It's so much worse than you said on the phone, isn't it?" she finally whispered against my shoulder. "It's complicated," I acknowledged, pulling back to look at her. "But we're going to handle it together." In the car, I explained the security detail, which Maddie accepted with a nod. She'd grown up with a father who sometimes dealt with high-profile, contentious corporate cases that occasionally resulted in threats. The concept of precautionary protection wasn't foreign to her. "Dad called me again last night," she said as we merged onto the freeway. "He was different. Desperate almost. He said you were making a terrible mistake, that you were being manipulated by his enemies at the firm." "What do you think?" I asked carefully. Maddie stared out the window at the passing cityscape. "I think Dad has always been convincing when he needs to be. It's what makes him a good lawyer." She turned to me, her eyes, Richard's eyes, clear and direct. "But he's never needed to convince me of anything this badly before. It felt wrong. At the hotel, I ordered breakfast for us both, though neither had much appetite. Over coffee, I outlined the situation in detail. Richard's affair with Vanessa, the securities fraud scheme, his flight to Mexico, and now the threats involving A supposed incident during her undergraduate years. Maddie listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When I mentioned the alleged academic misconduct, her brow furrowed. Wait, what incident? What is he talking about? According to your father, something involving prescription stimulants during finals. Is there any truth to it? She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. There was a situation. Not what he's implying, though. My heart sank. Tell me. My roommate's sophomore year, Alexis, had an Adderall prescription. During finals week, she realized someone had been stealing her medication. She reported it, and because we shared the suite, campus security questioned all of us. Were you involved? No, Maddie said firmly. They figured out it was a girl down the hall who had taken them. I was cleared completely. She paused, realization dawning. But Dad called me when it happened. He was concerned about potential impact on my med school applications, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. He said he'd take care of it to ensure there was no record. The pieces clicked into place. So there was an incident, but you weren't responsible. Yet Richard has somehow positioned it to make it seem like you were involved and he covered it up. That's insane, Maddie protested. There would be records showing I was cleared. Unless your father used his connections to alter those records, creating the appearance of guilt that he then made disappear. I closed my eyes briefly. It would be a perfect setup for blackmail down the road. He creates leverage that doesn't actually exist. Maddie's face paled. He wouldn't do that. Not to me. I reached across the table, taking her hand. Honey, I don't think he ever intended to use it against you. The leverage was meant for other situations, business deals maybe, or colleagues. But now he's desperate. He'd use his own manufactured evidence to threaten my career. Her voice was barely audible. Then, more strongly, what are we going to do? We're going to call his bluff, I said, squeezing her hand. If you're certain you were cleared, then we fight this head on. I am certain. Her jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of Richard in his more determined moments. What do you need me to do? First, write down everything you remember about the incident. Dates, names, the official outcome. Then call Alexis if you're still in touch. We need to establish the truth before Richard can twist it further. While Maddie made her notes, I checked the time. 8:15 a.m. Richard's deadline approached. I stepped onto the balcony and dialed the number he'd called from last night. He answered immediately. Have you made your decision, Elaine? I have, I replied, calmly. I'm not calling off the investigation, I'm not transferring the cabin, and I'm certainly not allowing you to threaten our daughter's future. Silence, then a low laugh. Always so righteous. I'd admire your principles if they weren't. So inconvenient. Maddie knows about your threats. She remembers the incident, Richard. She was cleared. Perhaps in her mind, he countered smoothly. But documentation can tell a different story, especially when it's been handled by the right people. You manufactured evidence against your own daughter. I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. Just to have leverage for a scenario like this. I created insurance, he corrected, which I'm now using. Last chance, Elaine. Call off the SEC and FBI by 9 a.m. or Mercer sends the file. Send it, I replied. We'll deal with the consequences. But understand this, the moment you pull that trigger, you lose Maddie forever. Is that really the legacy you want? Another pause, longer this time. You're bluffing. No, Richard. That's always been your specialty, not mine. I ended the call and turned to find Maddie standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of hurt and resolve. You heard? I asked. She nodded. Every word. I've already texted Alexis. She remembers everything and is willing to provide a statement. Her voice cracked slightly. I can't believe Dad would do this. I pulled her into another embrace. People can surprise us, especially when they're cornered, but we're going to get through this together. At precisely 9:01 a.m., Maddie's phone chimed with an email notification. She looked at me, fear visible in her eyes. "It's from Stanford's Ethics Committee," she whispered. Subject line, urgent review of academic conduct. "Forward it to Sam immediately," I instructed, already dialing Diana. "And don't delete anything." Within an hour, our hotel suite had transformed into an impromptu command center. Sam arrived with 2 paralegals. Diana brought technical experts who swept the room for surveillance devices and set up secure communication channels. Investigator Vasquez joined remotely via encrypted video link. The alleged evidence against Maddie was, as we'd suspected, a masterful fabrication. Richard had created a paper trail suggesting Maddie had purchased stimulants, used them to enhance her academic performance, and then he had leveraged connections to have the records sealed and expunged, all presented as a father protecting his daughter. "The timing of the document creation is our strongest counter-evidence," Diana's tech specialist explained, pointing to metadata details. "These files' hidden timestamps show they were created just months ago, not years ago during Maddie's sophomore year. We've already contacted Stanford with preliminary information," Sam added. "They're putting any ethics review on hold pending further investigation." Maddie sat quietly through all of this, her expression becoming more resolute with each revelation. Finally, she spoke up. "I want to go on record, formally, about everything Dad has done." I studied her face, seeing the determination there. "Are you sure? Once this becomes official testimony, there's no going back." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "He crossed a line, Mom. Not just with you, not just with his firm and clients, but with me. I won't let him use me as a weapon against you or anyone else." With her decision made, Maddie gave a detailed statement to investigator Vasquez, corroborated by documentation from Alexis and the original campus security report that Sam's team had managed to obtain from university archives. By early afternoon, the immediate threat to Maddie's academic standing had been neutralized, but the larger situation with Richard remained volatile. According to Diana's sources, he had relocated from Mexico City to a coastal property near Cancun, still accessible, but better positioned for a quick departure if needed. "We've got another problem," Diana announced, entering the suite after taking a call in the hallway. Victor Mercer was spotted at Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews' office building 30 minutes ago. "What would he be doing there?" Sam asked. "The firm has been alerted about him." Diana handed me her tablet, displaying security camera footage of Mercer, a lean, nondescript man in his 50s, entering the building through a service entrance. He used credentials that identified him as IT support. By the time security realized who he was, he'd already accessed the server room. The firm's data, I realized. Richard's package isn't just about Maddie. He's after the firm's confidential information. "Not just any information," Sam interjected, her expression grim. "If he's targeting the servers, he could access client files, financial records, partner communications, everything needed to implicate the entire firm in Richard's fraud scheme." The strategy became clear. Unable to escape consequences himself, Richard was attempting to create a massive scandal that would engulf the whole firm, muddying the waters of his own culpability. If everyone appeared guilty, his individual actions would seem less significant. Investigator Vasquez immediately contacted the FBI team monitoring the firm, but by then, Mercer had already disappeared. The damage assessment was ongoing, but preliminary reports suggested he had successfully accessed the main database and uploaded some kind of program before security protocols detected the breach. "It's probably a delayed release system," Diana's tech expert explained, "set to dump selected internal documents to media outlets, regulatory bodies, and competing firms simultaneously. Classic scorched earth tactic." "Can it be stopped?" I asked. He shrugged. "Possibly, if we can identify the trigger mechanism." but we'd need internal access to the firm's systems. I glanced at Maddie, who had been listening intently. I think I might know someone who can help with that. 30 minutes later, Vanessa Mitchell joined our impromptu war council. She looked startled by the assembled team, but quickly regained her composure. Richard mentioned Mercer would execute regardless of his direct input, she confirmed after being briefed. I assumed it was just more intimidation, but this makes sense. Richard always believed in mutually assured destruction as a negotiating principle. Do you have access to the firm's IT systems? Diana asked. Limited access, Vanessa replied. But I know who has complete access. Jeffrey Kim, the head of IT security. He and I worked closely on digitizing the Sullivan merger documents. A plan began to take shape. Vanessa would contact Jeffrey, explain the situation, and request his help identifying and neutralizing Mercer's program before it activated. Meanwhile, the FBI would continue tracking Mercer, who had last been seen heading toward LAX. As the various team members dispersed to execute their parts of the plan, Maddie pulled me aside. Mom, I've been thinking about something. If Dad really is trying to implicate the whole firm to minimize his own guilt, wouldn't he need to control the narrative about how the information gets discovered and presented? I considered her question. Yes, that would be typical of his approach. Maximum impact requires careful timing and framing. Then he must have media contacts already lined up, right? People positioned to receive and publish whatever Mercer sends them? Almost certainly, I agreed, seeing where her reasoning led. Financial journalists, industry bloggers, maybe even mainstream outlets. Maddie's eyes lit up with an idea. What if we got ahead of him? What if we approached select media with our version first, controlling the narrative before he can? It was brilliantly simple. Richard's plan depended on the shock value of unexpected revelations. By preemptively disclosing a carefully crafted version of events, we could defuse his bomb before it detonated. I immediately called Matthews, who had been keeping a respectful distance from our family crisis while managing the firm's response. He answered on the first ring. Matthews, I need the firm to take an unprecedented step, I began without preamble. You need to self-report certain aspects of the situation before Richard can weaponize them. There was a brief silence. You're suggesting we deliberately expose our own vulnerabilities? I'm suggesting you control the story instead of letting Richard define it. Emphasize the firm's discovery of the fraud, the immediate steps taken to address it, and the cooperation with authorities. Position yourselves as victims who are now leading the charge for accountability. After some discussion of specifics, Matthews agreed to convene an emergency executive committee meeting to draft a public statement. It's unorthodox, he admitted, but so is this entire situation. Meanwhile, Vanessa had made contact with Jeffrey Kim, who confirmed our fears. A sophisticated program had been installed on the firm's servers, scheduled to extract and distribute selected documents to pre-programmed recipients at midnight. Jeffrey thinks he can neutralize it, Vanessa reported, but he needs time to analyze the code without triggering any failsafes Mercer might have installed. As evening approached, our coordinated countermeasures began to take effect. The FBI located Mercer at a private airfield outside Los Angeles, where they took him into custody before his chartered flight could depart. Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews issued a preemptive statement to key media outlets, acknowledging the discovery of financial irregularities in transactions handled by a former partner and detailing their cooperation with federal investigators. Most crucially, Jeffrey Kim successfully identified and contained Mercer's program, preventing the mass distribution of internal documents that would have implicated innocent partners and associates. By 10 p.m., the immediate crisis had been averted. Richard's attempt to create a firm-wide scandal had failed, leaving him isolated as the clear focus of both criminal and civil proceedings. As our various allies departed the hotel suite, Maddie and I found ourselves alone for the first time since morning. She looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. What happens now? She asked, curling up on the sofa beside me. Richard remains in Mexico for the moment, but his options are narrowing. The Mexican authorities have been notified, and his accounts continue to be frozen. It's only a matter of time before he's extradited or attempts to flee to a non-extradition country. And us? What happens to us? I put my arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. We rebuilt. You returned to Stanford with your reputation intact. I hesitated, realizing I hadn't fully considered my own path forward. You what, Mom? Maddie prompted gently. I think I might finish what I started all those years ago, I said slowly, the idea taking shape as I spoke. Go back to law school. Maybe specialize in helping people who've been in situations like mine. Maddie smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since this ordeal began. I think that would be amazing. You've been extraordinary through all of this. We both have, I corrected her. Your father underestimated us both. As if summoned by his mention, my phone rang. Richard's number. I showed Maddie the screen. Should I answer it? I asked. She nodded firmly. Put it on speaker. No more secrets. I accepted the call. Richard. It's over, Elaine. His voice sounded different, defeated, yet somehow relieved. Your counter moves were impressive. I wouldn't have expected such tactical thinking from you. That was always your mistake, I replied evenly. Underestimating me. Underestimating Maddie. Maddie? His voice cracked slightly. Is she with you? I'm here, Dad, she said, her tone controlled but emotional. I know everything. The affair, the fraud, the fake evidence against me. A long silence followed. I never intended to actually use that against you, Madeline. You have to believe me. It was just leverage I never planned to exercise. But you did use it, she countered. The moment you felt cornered, you were willing to destroy my career to save yourself. Another silence. I'm sorry, he finally said, so quietly we almost missed it. To both of you. It doesn't change anything, I know that. But I am sorry. Where are you now? I asked. Does it matter? The authorities are looking for you, Richard. It would go better if you turned yourself in. A bitter laugh. Better? 20 years in federal prison instead of 25? No. I think I'll take my chances elsewhere. Dad, Maddie interjected, her voice stronger now. Running only makes it worse. For everyone, including yourself. Listen to your daughter, I added. She's wiser than either of us gave her credit for. Perhaps, Richard conceded. I'll consider it. He paused. Madeline, regardless of what you think of me now, know that I've always been proud of you. That part was never a lie. Before Maddie could respond, the line went dead. She stared at the phone for a long moment, tears welling in her eyes. Do you think he'll turn himself in? She asked finally. I don't know, I admitted. Your father has always believed he could outmaneuver any obstacle, but he's running out of moves. We sat together in contemplative silence, the city lights twinkling beyond the hotel windows. The path ahead remained uncertain. Legal proceedings, divorce, negotiations, emotional healing, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. Whatever Richard chose to do next, Maddie and I had already made our choice, to face the future together, stronger for having weathered the storm that had nearly torn us apart. And in the quiet of that hotel room, with my daughter's head resting against my shoulder, I realized that was victory enough for one day. 3 months passed with remarkable swiftness. Spring melted into summer, and the scandal that had briefly rocked Los Angeles' legal community gradually faded from headlines, replaced by newer, more sensational stories. I stood on the deck of my lake house, my sanctuary, watching the afternoon. Sunlight filter through the pines. The cabin had been thoroughly renovated, every trace of Richard and Vanessa erased. New furniture, new decor, new energy. The only things I'd kept were the original cedar beams and the spectacular view that had drawn me to this property in the first place. "Mom! Package just arrived," Maddie called from inside. She'd spent the summer break with me, postponing a research opportunity to help me rebuild not just the cabin, but our lives. Tomorrow she will drive back to Stanford for her 3rd year of medical school, stronger and more determined than ever. I turned from the view to find her holding a large envelope, bearing the UCLA School of Law logo. My acceptance letter. At 47, I was returning to complete what I'd abandoned 25 years earlier. "Are you going to open it?" Maddie asked, excitement dancing in her eyes. "It's just a formality," I said, taking the envelope. "My advisor already called to confirm my admission. Still, it's a moment worth marking." She was right, of course. I carefully opened the envelope and removed the official letter welcoming me to the fall semester's incoming class. Despite knowing what it contained, seeing it in writing brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "To new beginnings," Maddie said softly, hugging me. So much had changed since that April evening when I'd first discovered Richard's affair. The divorce was proceeding without contest. Richard had signed everything from Mexico, relinquishing claims to most of our shared assets in what his new attorney described as an effort to make amends. I suspected it was more pragmatic than remorseful. Fighting the divorce would only complicate his already dire legal situation. The criminal proceedings were moving forward as well. The SEC had filed formal charges against Richard for securities fraud, with additional charges from the Department of Justice pending. Taylor, Phillips, and Matthews had weathered the crisis remarkably well under Matthews's steady leadership, implementing new compliance protocols and accepting a substantial but survivable fine without admitting criminal liability. Vanessa Mitchell had negotiated a cooperation agreement with prosecutors, providing crucial testimony in exchange for immunity. Last I'd heard, she had relocated to Seattle to start over with a small corporate firm. Her ambitious path to partnership derailed, but not destroyed. And Richard himself remained in Mexico, fighting extradition through a series of increasingly desperate legal maneuvers, his assets frozen, his reputation shattered, his future uncertain. We had spoken only once since that night in the hotel room. A brief, strained conversation regarding the division of personal items from our Brentwood home, which I had decided to sell. "Have you heard anything more from Dad?" Maddie asked, as if reading my thoughts. I shook my head. "Nothing new. His attorney says the Mexican courts are still considering the extradition request." She nodded, her expression complicated. The relationship between father and daughter remained fractured, though Maddie had, with characteristic grace, left open the possibility of eventual reconciliation, on her terms, not his. "The realtor called this morning," I said, changing the subject. "We have 3 offers on the Brentwood house, all above the asking price. Are you going to accept one?" I'm leaning toward the family with 2 children. The house should have children in it again. We moved inside to prepare dinner, working together with the easy rhythm we'd developed over the summer. As I chopped vegetables for a salad, my phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "Just got word. Richard's extradition appeal was denied. Mexican authorities are taking him into custody tonight for transfer. Thought you should know." I showed the message to Maddie, who read it silently before returning to stirring the pasta sauce. "How do you feel about that?" I asked gently. She considered the question, her movements deliberate. Relieved, I think. Not happy, not vindicated, just relieved that it's moving toward some kind of resolution. "I understand that," I said, and I did. There was no joy in Richard's downfall, only a somber acknowledgement that actions have consequences, even for those who spent a lifetime believing they were immune. After dinner, we sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of pink and gold. The peace I felt wasn't about Richard's impending return to face justice. It was about the life I was creating beyond the shadow of his betrayal. "I've been thinking," Maddie said, breaking our companionable silence. About what happens after. Dad returns and the trial starts. What about it? The media attention will resurface, for both of us. She was right. Richard's arrest and trial would reignite public interest in the case. Our names would appear in news articles, our privacy once again under siege. We'll handle it together, I assured her. Like everything else. I know. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of how you've managed all of this. You never wanted revenge or public humiliation for Dad. You just wanted accountability and the chance to rebuild. Her words touched me deeply. Throughout this ordeal, I'd tried to model strength without bitterness, resolution without cruelty. Hearing that my daughter had recognized and valued that approach meant everything. Life is too short for vengeance, I said. Your father will face legal consequences for his actions. That's enough. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Perfect. Weather for Maddie's drive back to Stanford. We loaded her car with the studied efficiency of those who had done this before, though this departure felt different from previous years. We weren't just saying goodbye after a normal summer break. We were acknowledging the end of an intense chapter we had navigated together. Call me when you get there, I said, embracing her beside her packed car. Always do. She hugged me tightly. And let me know how your first week of classes goes. I will. Though I'll probably be the oldest student by decades, Maddie laughed. You'll also be the only one who knows exactly why they're there and what they want to accomplish. That counts for a lot. After she drove away, I returned to the cabin and began packing my own bags. In 2 days, I would return to Los Angeles to begin the next phase of my life. Law student, soon-to-be divorcee, woman reclaiming her independence. As I folded clothes into my suitcase, my phone rang with an unknown international number. Hesitantly, I answered. Elaine. Richard's voice, sounding tired and resigned. I'm being transported back tomorrow. I know, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wanted to speak with you directly, before the attorneys and courts take over everything. He paused. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. I imagine you have. I understand now why you couldn't call off the investigation, even with what I threatened. You were right to stand your ground. The admission surprised me. Richard had never been one to acknowledge his mistakes, let alone another person's wisdom, in opposing him. It wasn't just about principles, I said. It was about Maddie, about showing her that intimidation and threats shouldn't determine our choices. She learned that lesson well, he said, a hint of rueful pride in his voice. She's refused all my recent attempts at contact. That's her choice to make. She needs time. I know. Another pause. What about you, Elaine? What comes next for you? The question seemed genuine, without the manipulation that had characterized so much of our final interactions. I'm going back to law school, I told him. Finishing what I started before we met. You'll make an excellent attorney, he said, and I was surprised by the sincerity in his tone. Always more perceptive than most people in the room, including me. Thank you. The words felt strange, expressing gratitude to the man who had betrayed me so thoroughly, yet something in his voice suggested a fundamental shift, perhaps the beginning of genuine remorse. I won't ask for forgiveness, Richard continued. What I did to you, to Maddie, to everyone involved, it's beyond that. But I wanted you to know that I recognize the damage I've caused, and I'm prepared to accept the consequences. That's a start, I acknowledged. After a few more minutes of surprisingly civil conversation about practical matters related to the divorce, we said goodbye. Likely the last private conversation we would have before his case entered the public machinery of the justice system. I finished packing, then walked down to the lakeshore. The water lapped gently against the dock, soothing in its constancy. This place that had once been the site of betrayal had transformed into something else entirely, a symbol of resilience, of new possibilities, of peace reclaimed. Standing there, I reflected on the irony at the heart of my story. Richard's affair, his decision to move his mistress into my cabin, had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately freed me from a marriage that had long since lost its foundation. His betrayal had become, inadvertently, the catalyst for my reinvention. Tomorrow, he would return to face the legal system he had manipulated for decades. Next week, I would enter a classroom as a student again, embracing the path I had abandoned for him. And someday, when the pain and drama had faded further, Maddie might find her way to a new relationship with her father, one built on truth rather than illusion. But tonight belonged to me alone, to the woman who had discovered her own strength in the ruins of betrayal, to the future I was finally free to create on my own terms in the next chapter of a story still unfolding. 2 years later, the courtroom fell silent as the judge entered. I straightened in my seat, instinctively smoothing my charcoal skirt suit, a habit from my former life as a corporate wife that occasionally resurfaced despite my best efforts. All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Martinez, the bailiff announced. I stood alongside Sam, now both my attorney and mentor. Behind us, the gallery was packed with journalists, law students, and curious onlookers. The case had drawn considerable attention, not just for its salacious elements, but for its significance in white-collar criminal prosecution. The defendant's table remained conspicuously empty. Richard's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Bronson, stood alone. Her client had waived his right to be present for the sentencing, a final act of avoidance that surprised no one who knew him well. "Please be seated," Judge Martinez instructed, settling behind the bench and adjusting her glasses. "We're here today to conclude the matter of the United States versus Richard Taylor. After nearly 2 years of legal maneuvering, plea negotiations, and delays, Richard's case was finally reaching its resolution. He had ultimately accepted a plea deal on multiple counts of securities fraud, avoiding the more severe charges of racketeering and money laundering that prosecutors had initially threatened. I listened with composed detachment as Judge Martinez reviewed the case details. So much had happened since those frantic days when I'd first discovered Richard's betrayal. The world I inhabited now barely resembled the one I'd known then. "Ms. Bronson, does your client wish to make any statement to the court before sentencing?" the judge asked. Catherine Bronson rose. "Your Honor, Mr. Taylor has prepared a written statement that he's asked me to read on his behalf." Judge Martinez nodded her permission, and Bronson unfolded a single sheet of paper. "Your Honor," she began reading. "I stand before this court, through my counsel, fully accepting responsibility for my actions. The crimes I committed were not momentary lapses in judgment, but calculated decisions made from a place of entitlement and greed. I betrayed my clients, my partners, my professional ethics, and most grievously, my family. While no sentence can undo the harm I've caused, I accept whatever punishment the court deems appropriate, and I will use my time in incarceration to reflect on the wake of destruction my choices created. I especially wish to apologize to my former wife, Elaine, and my daughter, Madeline, who deserved far better than the husband and father I became." The statement continued with expressions of remorse and promises of rehabilitation that sounded sincere on paper but carried the unmistakable polish of an attorney's crafting. Still, something in the specific mention of entitlement and greed rang true. Perhaps Richard had gained some genuine insight during these 2 years of legal purgatory. When Bronson finished reading, Judge Martinez turned her attention to me. "Mrs. Taylor, as the primary victim impact statement has already been submitted in writing, would you like to add anything verbal at this time?" All eyes in the courtroom turned toward me. I rose slowly, consciously unclenching my hands. "Thank you, Your Honor, but I have nothing further to add. My written statement expresses everything I wish to convey." What I didn't say was that drafting that victim impact statement had been one of the most challenging assignments of my first year in law school. Professor Winters had approved my request to use my own case for our victim advocacy project, never expecting I would actually submit the resulting document to a federal court. The exercise had been cathartic, a way to translate raw emotion into reasoned legal language, to transform personal pain into professional purpose. Judge Martinez nodded, then proceeded with the sentencing. Richard Taylor, having pled guilty to 5 counts of securities fraud, you are hereby sentenced to 78 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $14.2 million to the affected parties as detailed in the plea agreement. The sentence, 6.5 years, was lighter than many had expected, though the financial penalties were substantial. I felt a curious absence of emotion as the judge continued outlining the terms. Neither vindication nor disappointment, just a quiet acknowledgement that one more chapter was closing. After the hearing adjourned, Sam and I made our way through the throng of reporters clustered outside the courthouse. My status as both the ex-wife of the defendant and a current law student had made me an object of fascination for legal journalists. "Ms. Taylor, how do you feel about the sentence?" a young reporter called out. "Do you think justice was served?" asked another. Sam expertly guided me past them with practiced efficiency. "Ms. Taylor has no comment at this time. The family is focused on moving forward." In Sam's car, I finally relaxed, slipping off the uncomfortable heels I'd worn for court. "You did well there," she said, navigating through downtown traffic. Dignified and composed. 3 years of practice, I replied with a small smile. Eventually, even seeing him becomes not normal exactly, but manageable. Although Richard had been free on bail throughout the legal proceedings, our paths had crossed only a handful of times, mostly in courtrooms and attorneys' offices. Our divorce had been finalized 18 months earlier, remarkably straightforward once Richard understood that fighting me would only worsen his legal position. "Are you still planning to drive up to the cabin this weekend?" Sam asked. "Yes. Maddie's meeting me there. She has a rare 4-day break between rotations. Give her my best. That girl is going to make an extraordinary doctor." I smiled with maternal pride. Maddie was thriving in her 4th year of medical school, having weathered the scandal with remarkable resilience. After a year of minimal contact with Richard, she had cautiously reopened communication. Brief, carefully bounded exchanges that acknowledged their complicated relationship without glossing over the damage done. "How's the clerkship application? Coming?" Sam changed the subject as we approached my apartment building. "Almost finished. Judge Harriman's office is my first choice, but I'm applying to 6 others as backup." Sam looked impressed. "Federal clerkships are incredibly competitive, especially for someone who'll be a new graduate at—" She hesitated. "At 49? I finished laughing. "It's okay, Sam. I've embraced being the eldest in my class. My classmates have started calling me Counselor Mom." Law school at midlife had been challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated, but also deeply rewarding. My life experience provided context that my younger classmates lacked, while their technological savvy and fresh perspectives pushed me to think differently. I'd found my niche in corporate accountability and white-collar crime, areas where my personal history provided unique insight. After Sam dropped me off, I changed into comfortable clothes and finished packing for the weekend at the cabin. As I folded a sweater, my phone rang with Maddie's ringtone. "Hey, Mom," she greeted me, the sounds of a hospital audible in the background. "Just checking in. How did it go?" 78 months, plus restitution. He wasn't there. Sent a written statement instead. Maddie was quiet for a moment. "That's about what we expected, right?" "Pretty much. How are you feeling about it?" Another pause. "Complicated. I'm glad there are consequences, but—" She sighed. "He's still my dad, you know." "I know, honey. and it's okay to have mixed feelings about all of this. We talked for a few more minutes about our plans for the weekend before she was called away for rounds. After hanging up, I finished packing, then pulled out my laptop to review my clerkship application once more. The following afternoon, I arrived at the cabin. Before Maddie. The property had transformed over the past 2 years, partly through renovations, but mostly through reclamation. Every space now reflected my preferences, my aesthetics, my life as it was rather than as it had been. I unlocked the door and breathed in the familiar scent of cedar and pine. Though I now lived primarily in a modest apartment near UCLA's campus, this place remained my true home, the one asset from my marriage that I had fought to keep without compromise. While waiting for Maddie, I walked down to the shore. The late Tuesday, October air carried a hint of the coming winter, but the afternoon sun still warms my face as I stood on the dock. The water stretched before me, mirror smooth and reflecting the surrounding mountains in perfect symmetry. My phone vibrated with a text notification, unknown number. I opened it cautiously. I heard the sentencing was today. I hope the outcome brings you some peace. Regardless, I wanted you to know I've been following your progress in law school. You're going to be an exceptional attorney. I truly mean that. R. Richard, his first direct communication in over a year. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. The text contained no excuses, no manipulations, no requests, just a simple acknowledgement. After several minutes of contemplation, I typed a reply. Thank you. I wish you clarity on the road ahead. Then I put my phone away and returned to watching the lake, refusing to let Richard's intrusion, however benign, disrupt my weekend with Maddie. When she arrived 2 hours later, we embraced in the driveway, both of us holding on a little longer than usual. At 26, Maddie had grown into a poised young woman, her features resembling mine more than Richard's, though she had inherited his analytical mind and determination. I bought groceries, she announced, lifting bags from her trunk. I thought, we could cook that pasta dish we made last time, the one with the cherry tomatoes and basil. Perfect, I agreed, taking some of the bags. How was the drive? Good. I listened to that case study podcast you recommended, the one about corporate fraud in pharmaceutical companies. Over dinner preparation, our conversation flowed easily. Between her medical rotations, my law classes, and the small details of our separate but connected lives. Neither of us mentioned Richard or the sentencing until we were seated on the deck with our pasta, watching the sunset paint the sky in dramatic oranges and purples. Dad texted me too, Maddie said quietly, twirling pasta around her fork. About the sentencing. What did he say? That he was sorry for putting me through this, again, and that he hoped I could focus on my future without his mistakes hanging over me. She set down her fork. He asked if I would consider visiting him at the federal facility after he's processed. Not right away, but eventually. And how do you feel about that? She considered the question carefully, a habit she'd developed through this ongoing family crisis. I think I might. Not immediately, but at some point. There's still so much unresolved between us. I nodded, respecting her thought process. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Would you ever visit him? She turned the question back to me. No, I replied honestly. Our chapter is closed. I wish him healing and growth, but not in my presence. Maddie accepted this without judgment, understanding the different nature of our respective relationships with Richard. After dinner, we built a fire in the stone fireplace and settled into our evening routine. Maddie reviewing medical journals, me working on my clerkship application. The comfortable silence between us was occasionally broken by comments about what we were reading or questions about each other's work. Oh, I almost forgot, Maddie said suddenly. I ran into Vanessa Mitchell last week at a conference in Seattle. I looked up, surprised. Really? How was that? Surprisingly not awkward. She's working for a healthcare compliance firm now, advising hospitals on regulatory issues. She asked about you, actually. What did she want to know? If you were really in law school. She seemed impressed when I confirmed it. Maddie hesitated. She said something interesting, that watching you navigate everything was part of what inspired her to refocus her career on compliance and ethics. I absorbed this information with a mix of emotions. Vanessa Mitchell had occupied a complicated place in our family story. Initially the other woman, then a fellow victim of Richard's manipulations, and ultimately a key witness whose testimony had strengthened the case against him. I'm glad she found a new path, I said finally. Everyone deserves the chance to rebuild. Later that night, unable to sleep, I stood at the bedroom window gazing at the moonlight reflecting off the lake. 2 years ago, I stood at this same window, devastated by betrayal, my future a terrifying blank. Now that future was taking shape, with clarity and purpose. In 6 months, I would graduate from law school, not as Richard Taylor's ex-wife, but as Elaine Barrett, reclaiming my maiden name along with my professional identity. My applications for judicial clerkships represented the next step in a journey I'd postponed for 25 years, but never truly abandoned. The irony wasn't lost on me, that Richard's greatest betrayal had ultimately led to my greatest liberation. That the cabin he'd used for his affair had become my sanctuary. That the legal profession he'd disgraced with his actions had welcomed me with opportunities to help repair such damage in the future. The next morning, Maddie and I hiked one of the mountain trails behind the cabin. At the summit, we paused to catch our breath and take in the spectacular view, the lake below us, the surrounding peaks, the infinite sky above. I have news, Maddie announced, pulling a water bottle from her backpack. I've been accepted for a pediatric residency at UCSF. It starts next summer. Maddie, that's wonderful. I hugged her, pride swelling in my chest. It was your first choice, wasn't it? She nodded, beaming. I didn't want to say anything until it was official, but yes, it's exactly where I wanted to be. Your father would be proud, I said, the words coming naturally despite everything. I know. She looked out over the landscape. I've thought a lot about telling him. I probably will, eventually. He made terrible choices, Maddie, but he always believed in your potential. That part was genuine. We stood in silence for a moment, acknowledging the complexity of family bonds that remain, even after trust is shattered. What about you? She asked. After graduation and your clerkship, what's your dream position? I considered the question, watching an eagle soar over the lake. I'm leaning toward the U.S. Attorney's Office, specifically their securities fraud division, or possibly the SEC's enforcement division. Fighting the Richard Taylors of the world, Maddie observed with a half-smile, in a manner of speaking. Though I prefer to think of it as protecting the Elaines and Maddies who get caught in their wake. As we began our descent back to the cabin, I felt a profound sense of rightness, not just about my career plans, but about the entire journey of the past 2 years. The painful dismantling of my former life had cleared space for something authentic to emerge. Richard would soon begin serving his sentence, paying his debt to society in the currency of time. The law firm had survived, chastened and reformed under Matthew's ethical leadership. Vanessa had found a way to transform her experience into meaningful work. Maddie was launching her medical career with hard-won wisdom about human complexity. And I was becoming the woman I might always have been, had life taken a different turn decades earlier. Not despite Richard's betrayal, but because of it. Because crisis forces choices that comfort never demands. When we reached the cabin, I paused on the deck, looking out at the lake that had witnessed both the unraveling of my marriage and the beginning of my reconstruction. What are you thinking about? Maddie asked, joining me at the railing. That sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one, I replied, and that I'm grateful to be writing this new chapter with you. She slipped her arm through mine, and we stood together in the sunshine. Two women who had weathered a storm and emerged not just intact, but stronger, ready to embrace the futures we were now free to create on our own terms. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.